So I did my project on Guiding Struggling Learners to Become Proficient Readers by Katie Neustadter. The goal of this research was to determine ways to help struggling readers. My objective was to explicitly teach and practice the strategy of recall with a first grade student. In order to strengthen a student's comprehension ability, I used technology, comprehension strategies, and various leveled authentic texts. Each reading lesson incorporated recall strategies. The findings from the study are beneficial for special education and general education teachers within an elementary school setting. My first theme was relationship between fluency and comprehension using authentic text. According to Pikleski and Chard, fluency is the ability to read text quickly, accurately, and with proper expression. It builds on a foundation of oral language skills, phonemic awareness, familiarity with letter forms, and efficient decoding skills. However, prior knowledge plays a major role in whether children can find meaning within text. Comprehension and fluency go hand in hand. If a reader has not developed fluency, the focus is on decoding instead of constructing meaning. They also believed a significant number of these children had developed a distorted conceptualization of reading, focusing their energies on high-level word recognition and fluency without also developing high levels of comprehension. On the other hand, Applegate, and Modella suggest that fluency must take comprehension's place among many other cognitive processes that affect the quality of comprehension, such as background knowledge, vocabulary, motivation, selective attention, and schemata organization. These researchers believe that there is indeed a correlation between fluency and comprehension, but the way to teach it is different. Priebe, Keenan, and Miller found that prior knowledge of a passage topic facilitated comprehension. Children who have prior knowledge of a passage topic are able to read text more fluently than students who do not. In this way, their accuracy was high and their reading errors were low. Essentially, familiarization with the topic is a key component to comprehension. Allington reported that struggling readers were more likely to be engaged when the text they were reading better matched their reading levels. Many struggling readers have a plethora of grade-level text that they cannot read accurately, and as a result, their comprehension is not being assessed and their reading development is halted. Allington proposed using authentic text, specifically books on a student's independent reading level, so stories could be read with fluency and they could find meaning from it. Thus, students' confidence levels will also increase. Authentic text should not only be on their level, but should also interest them. My second theme was called Retelling as a Way to Strengthen Comprehension. Students who are struggling with their comprehension are also lacking in their ability to recall key sequential events. Koskinen, Gambrell, Kapanis, and Heathington suggest a strategy called retelling, where they believe oral language opportunities encourage children to talk about what was read as an important component of comprehension. Retelling is a strategy used to help readers improve their reading comprehension ability through verbalizing key events from a text and providing a personal interpretation of it. Reed and Vaughn further strengthen the idea of retelling by explaining how students need to remember information, organizing it in a meaningful way, and draw conclusions about the relationship among the ideas. Students who are less proficient readers need help identifying ways to recall the information. With the help of direct instruction strategies, they will improve. Cohen, Crush, and May found that retelling of the text structure and narration impacted both fluency and comprehension. Through the use of leveled authentic text, students' fluency and recall enhanced. These researchers believe when assessing students' retell, it should be used in relation to oral reading fluency to help identify the relationship between fluency and comprehension. It will also provide a network for more independent leveled resources to maximize the effectiveness of reading instruction. Duke and Pearson, retelling improves comprehension because children remember information that they deem important. How a child organizes information and sequences it to make sense of the text allows a teacher to understand personal connections they are making. Practice in retelling allows children to grasp a story concept, use critical thinking skills, broaden their oral language development. My last theme was integrating technology to increase comprehension. Beach found high levels of students' engagement through their use of digital tools for the social purposes of assessing, sharing, communication, and reflecting on knowledge as part of a shared learning commons. Students are participating in collaborative shared learning, Students are participating in collaborative gaming activities for both acquiring knowledge and learning collaboration practices. The constant attention on gaming should transfer into the classroom in an educational manner. Hamilton believes the integration of technology with classroom content improves student achievement. This researcher feels that a motivating and engaging lesson where the information encourages complex thinking, problem solving, and collaboration strengthens student achievement. So my student, she was a 7-year-old girl named Cameron. The year started off a little bit difficult for Cameron, as this was the first time she was ever away from her twin sister. Cameron struggled to find her identity, always reverting back to how much she missed her sister. The focus in the beginning was more on how to cope without her loved one rather than on the instruction. As the year progressed, without being overshadowed by her sister, Cameron's reading deficits really became more clear. Throughout the year, Cameron struggled with fluency and comprehension, so instead of always reading with me in the classroom, she also received basic skills instruction as a pull-out program daily. So the methods and procedures that I used. In first grade, the Developmental Reading Assessment, or the DRA, is administered to help determine students' instructional reading level. The DRA requires students to read a selection and then retell what they have read. Cameron came into first grade on DRA 3, a level signifying the beginning of first grade, and the goal for students to be on a DRA 16 by the time they exit first grade. Cameron left on a DRA 12. I further tested using the Qualitative Reading Inventory, or the QRI, which assesses reading ability by requiring students to read narrative passages, answer comprehension questions, and retell sequential events. This assessment also provides suggestions for intervention instruction. So the results of this QRI proved that Cameron was indeed struggling with retelling on the Primer level, 19%. And I tested her on both Pre-Primer 2 and 3 to see if this recall struggle continued in easier stories. On Pre-Primer 2, she scored 47%, and similarly on Pre-Primer 3, she scored 33%. Cameron was unable to recall most of the important events in every story, and as the stories became more difficult, her percentages decreased. Cameron and I worked one-on-one within the classroom for 2 weeks. Our routine was to work consistently for about a half hour at a time. If we ran out of time, we always continued with the lesson the next day. Based on Cameron's DRI reading level, I picked authentic texts that she could read independently. I focused on literary elements such as setting, characters, problem, and solution to help Cameron identify important events in a story. I used a strategic tool called a retelling rope to guide her. As she read, she looked at visuals to put the events into sequential order on the rope. Retelling is an important component of discriminating comprehension in beginning readers. Making retelling hands-on is important for comprehension. I noticed Cameron learned better when she incorporated multiple senses. In addition to the retelling rope, Cameron needs to complete a graphic organizer that also had the same visuals as the rope. After orally recalling the information, now she needs to write it using complete sentences. I used 2 rubrics to assess retell. The first rubric was used to record what Cameron said orally about all the events in the story. This rubric focused on how well Cameron identified the main events, if the events were sequenced appropriately, and if she could summarize the story. The scale was based off 1 to 4, 1 being the lowest and 4 being the highest. The second rubric was used to assess the information on the graphic organizer. This rubric focused on the following story elements: setting, characters, problem, events in order, and solution. This rubric was a checklist. If Cameron wrote down what was intended, she received a check in the appropriate box. If not, there was a different box, I need practice, which was then checked off. This process was repeated with 3 separate texts. So our first session together, we start out by completing a picture walk of one of authentic text. I explained the literary elements of beginning, middle, end, characters, setting, problem, and solution. I used pictures to help identify the terms. Examples were always provided to help her further understand each element, such as, if Mom asked you all about your day, you will probably tell her the events from beginning to end. And she even came up with some examples herself, like if there was a problem, she was lost, and her solution would be to find someone to help her. Then the retelling rope was introduced as a tool that could help with identifying the key events in the story. I showed Cameron what the retelling rope looked like. Before we put it together, we started reading an authentic text. Cameron read with no help. Then we were able to put together her retelling rope. Before we glued each piece, Cameron needed to identify each event in the story. She was able to look back in the story if she needed help. With guidance, she was able to figure out the literary elements and put her retelling rope together. Cameron and I verbally discussed the graphic organizer and how the pictures of the rope were also on the graphic organizer. We discussed that she will not be using bullet points to explain an idea, but rather writing complete sentences. Again, she was allowed to look back in the story if she were stuck or if she wanted to make sure her answers were correct. And our second session, we began with another review of the literary elements, And if she had trouble remembering anything, we always went over it. And I noticed that she had trouble with setting and solution because they both started with an S. I showed Cameron the retelling rope. She was able to identify what each picture on the rope meant. The visuals on the rope helped her to remember. She began to read and stumbled upon a few words. She could have sounded these out, but she relied on the visuals to help her. I noticed the word polka dot included a picture of the teacher with a polka dot headband. This really helped Cameron identify the word, but when the word came up later in the book, the visual was not there, and Cameron really struggled to identify what the word was. This further determined that she relied on the pictures to help her recognize certain challenging words and hinted that memory should be further assessed. After reading, Cameron used the retelling rope as a guide to help her identify the main events in the story. Based on the information she provided, Cameron struggled with beginning, middle, and end. I further reviewed these elements and had her look at the retelling rope as I did more explaining. Cameron was then instructed to complete the retelling graphic organizer independently after I explained it. Once again, she was encouraged to look back in the book if she needed help. I observed her completing this task, and she was able to do it without any hesitation or anxiety. Having the visuals on the graphic organizer mimic the visuals on the retelling rope really helped her. When she was finished, we went over the graphic organizer together. Our third session, we previewed the book and made a prediction of what she thought the new story would be about. She was able to do this. Cameron gave a nice retelling while previewing the pictures. This helped identify that Cameron was beginning to understand the sequence of events in a story. She did not hesitate while explaining any of the literary elements, especially the ones with the two S's, solution and setting. When she finished reading, she used her retelling rope to orally explain each event, and she did this with no problems. Once again, I went over how the characters, setting, and problem are usually in the beginning of the story and pointed out the location of each on the retelling rope. I also explained how I wanted her to elaborate on her answers, and she was fully capable of adding more details and stretching her ideas, but really doesn't do so independently. Cameron was then instructed to complete the retelling graphic organizer independently. She did not need any explaining on how to do it this time. From observation, Cameron did look back into the story for information. When she was finished, we went over the graphic organizer together. So these are the tools. You'll notice that the picture with the yellow, and you'll notice the rope right next to it. That's the retelling rope. The pictures are right there for setting, characters, problem, beginning, middle, end, and solution. And on the other side, you'll notice that that was the graphic organizer. The pictures are exactly the same. The technology. So I used my iPad, since our technology is a little bit limited and we do not have iPads within the classroom. I used 3 different apps. The first app was Dog and Bone, and this was an interactive story. Cameron could click each line in the story for it to speak to her, and afterwards she played a sequencing game, and she really enjoyed this game. A question was proposed such as what was the first thing that happened in the story, and Cameron needed to get the dog bone on the correct event by moving the iPad from side to side. So the bone would land on that event, and she had a little bit trouble at first because the bone kept landing on different events, but after with some practice she was able to eventually put the events in order. Another game was called Sequencing. It had multiple levels of difficulty, and to play she needed to place the events of everyday activities in order. She started with an easy level, but as she got the events correct, she was able to move up to a harder level. And then the last one was 3 different stories: At the Dump, Playing, and Farmer's Lunch. And after the book was read to her, she needed to answer comprehension questions. And I looked over her shoulder, and she was able to answer the questions. But with this app, she was really unable to look back to find evidence in the story, which I was teaching her how to do that. So my findings. Since working together one-on-one, Cameron presented improvements in many areas of her retell. She first started out hesitant and unsure about how to determine events from a story, as evidenced in her QI results. She constantly relied on teacher assistants to figure out what the answers were, or was unable to provide enough information when explaining. With practice on how to orally recall events using retelling rope and draft events on the graphic organizer, Cameron started to grasp the idea of knowing ways to identify significant events from a story. She began to rely less on me and more on the reading strategies of using graphic organizers and looking back in the story to retell. The next 2 figures show Cameron's progress in her oral and written retell. When we first started, Cameron was able to orally retell the setting, characters, problem, events, and the solution, but with prompting and assistance. She was using visual aids to help identify all elements. Her lack of confidence was evident in her written retell. With support, Cameron could identify the main event. She could accurately sequence 2 or 3 events and was able to reference the story when summarizing. She struggled to recognize all events in the story when looking back. So you'll notice here, this is the oral retell. I broke it down by first session, second session, third session. You'll notice on the top, those are the points that I looked into: tell the setting, use character names, tell the problem, time, tell the events in order, tell the solution. You'll notice in the first session it was all with help. In the second session, she really needed practice with telling the events in order. And in the third session, she needed practice with telling of the setting. This was the written retell. I broke it down similarly. First session, second session, third session. This had 3 important key components: identify the main events, sequencing the main events, and summarizing the story. You'll notice that in all 3 sessions, she was able to identify the main event. She did not receive a 4 because she still went back looking